Have you ever wondered what you'd do if everything you cherished was suddenly threatened? For James Thompson, that moment came on a crisp autumn morning when the land his family had nurtured for generations faced an unexpected battle, one that would test not just his resolve, but the very spirit of Meadow Creek itself. The unexpected discovery. The morning sun cast long shadows across the century-old oak trees that lined Thompson Farm as James poured his first cup of coffee. At 73, his movements had slowed, but his mind remained sharp as a tack. The farmhouse kitchen, with its worn countertops and the familiar tick of his grandfather's clock, had been the heart of family gatherings for over 6 decades. The phone's shrill ring cut through the peaceful morning. "James? It's Martha Wilkins from next door. You need to see what's happening on your east field. There are bulldozers. They started at dawn." James nearly dropped his mug. "Bulldozers? That can't be right." "I'm looking at them right now," Martha insisted, her voice shaking. "Big yellow machines tearing up your land where your father used to grow that sweet corn everyone loved." Grabbing his jacket and keys, James hurried outside. His boots crunched on the gravel driveway as he made his way to his old Ford pickup, the same one he'd driven since retiring from teaching at Meadow Creek High 15 years ago. The engine sputtered to life, protesting against the cool morning air. As he crested the hill overlooking the eastern section of his property, his heart sank. Martha hadn't exaggerated. 3 massive bulldozers carved deep wounds into the soil his family had tended for generations. Workers in hard hats moved about, marking areas with bright orange spray paint. A large sign stood near the road, "Future home of Sunny Pines East, 96 luxury homes starting at $450,000. James parked his truck and approached a woman standing apart from the workers. She wore spotless beige pants and a crisp white blouse despite the dusty surroundings. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she held a clipboard while talking on her phone. "Excuse me," James said when she finished her call. "What's happening here?" She looked him up and down like he was a door-to-door salesman interrupting her day. "We're preparing for residential development." Her voice was practiced and smooth. Diane Reynolds, Sunny Pines Homeowners Association president. She extended her hand without warmth. "This is my land," James said, ignoring her handshake. "It's been in the Thompson family for 4 generations." Diane's smile didn't reach her eyes. "There must be some misunderstanding. Sunny Pines Development purchased this parcel last year. We have all the necessary permits and approvals." "That's impossible. I would never sell this land." "Perhaps you forgot. The sale was finalized 9 months ago. We've been planning this expansion for years." James felt his blood pressure rising. At 73, he knew stress wasn't good for his heart, but this was too much. "I need to see those documents." "You're welcome to contact our legal department." Diane handed him a business card. "But I assure you, everything is in order. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have a schedule to maintain." She turned away, already dialing another number on her phone. James stood there, feeling helpless as machines continued to tear up the soil that had fed his family for generations. Uncovering the truth. Back at the farmhouse, Martha waited on the porch with a pitcher of iced tea and a worried expression. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite being in her 70s, she stood straight as an arrow, a testament to her years as a ballet teacher. "They started showing up with measuring tools about 3 months ago," she explained as James sank into the porch swing. "You were visiting your daughter in Phoenix then. I tried calling, but you know how cell reception is out there." "Did I mention selling any land to you?" James asked, his voice strained. "Never. You've always said this farm would stay in the Thompson family forever." Martha's eyes watered. "The day before you went to the hospital for your hip replacement, you were looking through your father's old office. Said you needed to find something important to protect the farm." James's father's office remained largely untouched since his passing 15 years ago. The small room smelled of pipe tobacco and old books. Shelves lined the walls, stuffed with farming almanacs, family photo albums, and decades of careful records. His father had tracked everything: rainfall amounts, crop yields, equipment repairs, all written in his neat handwriting. Where would he have kept property records? The filing cabinet seemed the obvious place to start. James pulled open the top drawer and found folders organized by year. Nothing about land sales or Sunny Pines. Hours passed as he searched. Night fell, and his eyes grew tired from reading faded documents by lamplight. Just as he was about to give up, he noticed a loose floorboard under the desk. When he pressed it with his foot, it moved slightly. He knelt down, no small feat with his artificial hip, and pried the board open with a letter opener. Inside the small hidden space was a metal box. The key hung from a nail on the underside of the desk. Inside the box, he found the deed to the farm, his father's will naming him as heir, and several yellowed surveys of the property. But most interesting was a letter addressed to him in his father's handwriting. "If you're reading this," it began, "then someone's trying to take what's ours." James's hands shook as he read his father's words. The letter explained that developers had been eyeing their land for years. They tried to pressure his father into selling, but he always refused. In his final months, someone from a development company visited repeatedly. The man claimed to need a simple signature for a road easement, bringing different papers each time. "I never signed away my land," his father wrote. "If they say I did, it's a lie. Look at the original survey from 1910 and compare it to what's recorded at the county now. The truth is in the boundaries." James dug deeper into the box and found the original survey. It showed property lines that extended much further than he'd realized. According to this document, Thompson Farm was nearly 280 acres, not the 200 listed in current records. Sleep evaded him that night. He spread the papers across the kitchen table, comparing the old survey with newer maps. Something strange had happened over the decades. The eastern boundary had shifted, reducing their land. It wasn't just the area under construction. According to these original documents, they owned land where part of the existing Sunny Pines development already stood. At dawn, he knew what he had to do. First, he needed a lawyer. Then he needed to understand exactly what Diane Reynolds and her HOA were up to. If they thought they could steal from his family, they were about to learn a painful lesson. James folded his father's letter and put it in his pocket. "I won't let you down," he whispered to the empty room. By 8 a.m., James waited outside the office of Walter Franklin, the only property lawyer in Meadow Creek. His secretary looked surprised when he asked for an emergency appointment, but she squeezed him in before lunch. "So you believe Sunny Pines is building on land that belongs to you?" Walter said after James explained his situation. He was older than James expected, with thick glasses and a bow tie that seemed from another era. James spread the documents across his desk. "These are the original surveys from 1910, updated in 1978. Compare them to the current county records." Walter studied both sets of papers, tracing boundary lines with his finger. His eyebrows rose higher with each passing minute. "This is highly unusual," he finally said. "According to these original documents, your property extends nearly half a mile further east than what's currently recorded. That would include not just the construction site but also the existing Sunny Pines clubhouse and about 20 homes built 5 years ago." "I know," James said grimly. Walter removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "A boundary dispute of this magnitude won't be simple. We need to understand how and when these changes occurred in the official record." He called the county assessor's office, putting the call on speaker. After navigating a maze of departments, they learned something shocking. In 1984, a minor adjustment to the eastern boundary was recorded, just a 10-foot easement for utilities. But in 1997, a much larger change appeared, reducing the property by nearly 80 acres. The documentation was sparse, just a form with a signature that barely resembled James's father's handwriting. "Dad would have been in the hospital that month," James said, checking the date. "Triple bypass surgery. He couldn't have signed this." Walter's expression turned grave. "That would constitute fraud. But proving it after all these years won't be easy." "What can we do?" James asked. "File for an emergency injunction to halt construction immediately. Then petition the court to recognize the original boundaries based on the historic surveys. We'll need a professional surveyor to verify these old maps." As Walter prepared the emergency filing, James realized he needed more ammunition. He drove to the county records office and requested everything they had on Sunny Pines Development Company. Hours later, hidden in a back corner of the library with stacks of public records, he discovered gold. Sunny Pines wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a complex web of LLCs and holding companies. The same 6 names appeared throughout: Diane Reynolds, her husband Thomas Reynolds, County Commissioner James Harris, Planning Board Director Mark Wilson, and 2 others he didn't recognize. But the most interesting document was from just 3 months ago. A loan approval for $16 million to finance Sunny Pines East, with the land itself listed as collateral. His land. James took photos of everything with his phone and headed to his next stop, the offices of the Meadow Creek Gazette, their local newspaper. The editor, Tanya Williams, had known his father. When James told her he was investigating potential fraud involving prominent local officials, her journalistic instincts perked up. "I can't publish accusations without evidence," she warned, "but I can look into the approval process for this development." It did seem to move unusually fast. Back at the farmhouse, James found Martha talking to another elderly neighbor, Mr. Grayson. When James mentioned Diane Reynolds, Grayson's face darkened. "That woman is the reason I sold my place," he said bitterly. "The HOA fined me every week for unapproved landscaping. I'd been growing those tomatoes for 20 years. Then they said my workshop violated some rule they just made up. The fines kept coming until I couldn't afford to fight anymore." "How many others did this happen to?" James asked. "At least a dozen old-timers sold out in the last 5 years. Always for less than market value, always to companies I later found out were connected to those Sunny Pines people." A pattern emerged: find vulnerable landowners, harass them with fines and regulations, force them to sell cheap, develop the land, and make millions. James's father had been their latest target, but he'd been one step ahead. James's phone rang. "Walter Franklin. The judge granted our emergency injunction," he said. "Construction has to stop immediately until a hearing next week. But brace yourself, this is going to get ugly." James thanked him and hung up, feeling a small victory. He drove back to the construction site with the court order in hand. The workers were packing up for the day when he arrived. Diane's sleek black SUV still sat near the site office. She came out as he approached, phone to her ear as usual. When she saw him, her expression hardened. "Construction stops now," James said, handing her the court order. "Legal boundaries are in dispute." She scanned the document, her perfect composure cracking slightly. "This is ridiculous. We have every approval we need." "Based on fraudulent boundaries. I have the original surveys." For the first time, uncertainty flashed in her eyes. It vanished quickly, replaced by cold determination. "This little stunt will cost you," she said quietly. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, I do. 6 names on dozens of business filings. $16 million in loans using stolen land as collateral. County officials fast-tracking approvals for projects they secretly invest in." James hadn't planned to reveal how much he knew, but the look on her face was worth it. Diane's perfectly manicured hand tightened around her phone until her knuckles turned white. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "We can be reasonable. Perhaps you'd consider a generous offer for the remaining farmland? 7 figures, immediate payment." "Not interested. Everyone has a price." Her smile returned, confident and predatory. "Think about it. You're in your 70s. What do you care about some old dirt? This old dirt has been in my family for 4 generations. It's not for sale." James turned to leave, feeling her eyes burning into his back. As he reached his truck, she called out, "Commissioner Harris is my husband's golf partner. Judge Evans comes to my dinner parties. You think your injunction will last? You're nobody in this town." He drove away, her words echoing in his mind. She was right about one thing: he wasn't as connected as she was. But she'd overlooked something important. His father hadn't been. He'd lived in Meadow Creek his entire life, knew everyone, and was respected even by those who disagreed with him. And he'd left James more than just land. Back at the farmhouse, James returned to his father's office. If his father had anticipated this fight, what else had he prepared? He searched more carefully, examining every folder, every notebook. In an album labeled Community Picnic 2018, he found dozens of photos of his father with neighbors, local business owners, and families who'd known him forever. Each photo had names written on the back. These weren't just memories, they were connections, people who might stand with him against sunny pines. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number: "Parking violation at your property. Fine. $500, Sunny Pines HOA compliance." Attached was a photo of his truck parked at his own farm. This was how it started, the pattern Mr. Grayson had described. Harassment by paperwork. But unlike the others, James knew their game now, and he had something they didn't expect. His father's secret weapon, still hidden in his files, waiting for the right moment. As night fell over the farm, James sat on the porch where his father used to tell stories during summer evenings. The eastern fields lay quiet now, construction equipment abandoned under the court order. But this was just the beginning. Tomorrow, Diane would mobilize her connections. The real fight was coming. What she didn't realize was that James had found more than just property surveys in his father's hidden box. He'd found documents that didn't just question the boundary changes, they revealed who had falsified them, when, and why. Diane thought she was dealing with an elderly man fighting for sentimental land. She had no idea she was facing the ghost of James's father, who had documented every dirty deal and suspicious approval for years, patiently building a case while they thought he was just a stubborn old farmer. The trap was set. All James had to do was let them walk further into it. The showdown. James's heart pounded as he pushed open the glass doors of the Sunny Pines Community Center. Tonight was the night he'd been planning for weeks. Inside, nearly 100 people filled rows of folding chairs. They chatted excitedly about new tennis courts and fancy streets while sipping punch from small plastic cups. At the front, Diane Reynolds stood tall in her bright red blazer, pointing at colorful pictures of big houses on a screen. "Just imagine the swimming pool with its waterfall feature," she said, smiling wide at the crowd. "Our homes will be worth so much more once these new neighbors move in." People clapped. A few whistled. Nobody knew what James carried in his folder would ruin their party. He took a deep breath and walked straight down the center aisle. "Excuse me," he said, loud enough to make heads turn. "I need to speak about this development." Diane's smile dropped for a second, then returned, faker than before. "We'll take questions after the presentation." "This can't wait," James replied, stepping onto the small stage. He faced the curious crowd. "My name is James Thompson. My family has owned Thompson Farm for 4 generations. The old property we purchased," Diane cut in quickly. "Yes, we're very grateful to finally develop that eyesore." Murmurs rippled through the room. James opened his folder and pulled out the first document. "This is the original land survey from 1910, he said, holding it up. "And this is the updated survey from 1978. He held up another paper. "According to these legal documents, my family's land extends 80 acres farther east than what appears in current county records." He turned to face the HOA board members seated in a row behind the podium. He placed copies in front of each of them. "Put simply," he continued, "you're building on land that legally belongs to me. And not just the new development. According to these boundaries, 20 existing homes and your clubhouse are sitting on my property too." The room exploded with voices. People stood up. Someone knocked over a chair. "This is ridiculous," Diane shouted, grabbing one of the surveys. "We have permits. We've sold lots. Construction has already started." James stayed calm while she grew redder. "Your permits are based on incorrect property lines. I filed papers with the court to stop all building immediately." Gerald Fisher, a balding man with thick glasses who served as the HOA treasurer, studied the documents with growing panic. "Diane," he whispered, loudly enough for the microphone to catch, "these boundary markers match the old creek bed. They look real." She yanked the papers from his hands. "This is clearly some kind of trick to get money from us. We'll fight this nonsense." "You're welcome to try," James replied, pulling out one final document. "But here's something you should know. According to these legal boundaries, your personal house, Diane, sits entirely on what is legally my land. The room went completely quiet. People looked at each other, suddenly understanding what this meant. 20 families might not actually own the ground under their homes. A man in the back stood up. "Are you saying we might lose our houses?" Before James could answer, Diane slammed her hand on the podium. "This meeting is over. Everyone out. The board needs to discuss this privately." As people shuffled out, whispering nervously, a younger woman touched James's arm. "I'm Rachel Winters. I just put my life savings into a lot in the new section. What happens to me?" James hadn't expected to face the human cost so directly. "I'm not trying to hurt regular people," he told her honestly. "This is about fixing a wrong." "Don't listen to a word he says," Diane hissed, suddenly beside them. After everyone else left, she leaned close to James's face. "You have no idea who you're messing with. I built Sunny Pines from nothing. Nobody takes it from me." Her threat hung in the air between them as she stormed off, leaving James alone in the empty room. Through the windows, he could see clusters of worried homeowners in the parking lot. His phone buzzed with a text from Walter. "How did it go?" James typed back, "They know now. Get ready for their next move." What he didn't tell Walter was how shaken he felt. He had lit the fuse, but he wasn't sure if he was prepared for the explosion that would follow. These weren't just paper houses on a map. They were people's homes and dreams. But they had built those dreams on his family's stolen land. Someone would end up losing everything, and Diane Reynolds wasn't going to go down without a fight. James jerked awake to the sound of engines outside his farmhouse. Bright lights flooded through the windows. He stumbled to the porch to find 3 white SUVs with Sunny Pines Security painted on their doors parked in a row, blocking his driveway. Men in uniforms stood by the vehicles. One stepped forward, handing James a thick envelope. "Cease and desist notice from the Sunny Pines Homeowners Association," he said flatly. "You are ordered to withdraw all claims against the development or face legal action." James tore open the envelope. Inside was a letter claiming his documents were fake and that he was attempting to commit fraud. They demanded he pay for damages to the community's reputation. "You can't be serious," James said. The man shrugged. "Just delivering the message. Have a nice day." He returned to his vehicle, but none of them left. James tried to leave for breakfast in town but discovered they had placed large concrete blocks across the end of his driveway overnight. "Sorry, sir," one guard said without looking sorry at all. "This access point hasn't been approved by the development committee. It's been closed for safety reasons." James was trapped on his own property. He called the sheriff's office but was told they couldn't help with a civil dispute and suggested he get a lawyer. His phone rang. Diane's name flashed on the screen. He hadn't given her his number. "Good morning," she said sweetly when he answered. "Enjoying the view?" "This is harassment," James said. "You can't block access to my property." Actually, according to county records, the real ones, that driveway crosses Sunny Pines common areas. We're within our rights to control access. You know those records are wrong. She laughed. "Let me explain how this works. The county commissioner plays golf with my husband every Sunday. The building inspector's daughter works for my real estate company. The water department supervisor lives in Sunny Pines." James felt his stomach drop as she continued. "By tomorrow, your farmhouse will be cited for at least 15 code violations. Your water might get shut off due to maintenance issues. Local contractors won't return your calls because they know better than to cross me." "That's illegal," James said. "That's small-town politics," she replied. "You can't win this. But I'm reasonable. Drop your claims, sign over the disputed acres, and this all goes away. I'll even throw in a nice payment for your trouble." "This isn't about money," James told her. "It's always about money, dear. Think it over. You have until tomorrow." She hung up. James stared at his phone, then at the security vehicle still parked outside. They weren't leaving. True to Diane's word, by afternoon, a county inspector arrived to examine the farmhouse. He found problems with everything: the wiring, the septic system, the porch railings. He handed James a list of violations that would cost thousands to fix, all needed immediately. As he left, another truck arrived. Workers put up signs along James's property line. Future home of Sunny Pines East, luxury living coming soon. James's water pressure dropped to a trickle. When he called the utility company, they claimed there was maintenance work happening and couldn't say when it would be fixed. He tried ordering pizza delivery for dinner. The driver called to say he couldn't find the address, though delivery had never been a problem before. James was being cut off, step by step. That night, he sat on the porch in darkness, watching the security lights sweeping across the fields where his father had once grown corn. Their bulldozers sat silent in the distance, waiting to continue destroying his legacy. His phone lit up with a message from Walter. "They've filed a countersuit claiming your documents are forged. Court date set for 3 months from now. They'll keep building in the meantime." 3 months? By then, the houses would be half finished. The damage would be done. James scrolled through his contacts, looking for anyone who might help. A name caught his eye: Janet Rivera, a reporter for the regional newspaper. They'd gone to high school together. He hadn't spoken to her in years, but maybe. As he considered calling her, headlights appeared on the long driveway. A car carefully maneuvered around the concrete barriers and approached the house. James tensed, wondering what new trouble Diane was sending his way. The car parked, and a familiar figure stepped out: Gerald Fisher, the HOA treasurer who had examined his documents at the meeting. "I shouldn't be here," he said nervously, glancing back at the security vehicles in the distance. "If Diane finds out." "Why are you here?" James asked. Gerald pulled out a flash drive from his pocket. "Because what she's doing isn't right. I've been keeping the HOA books for 7 years. There are things you should see." James invited him inside, away from watching eyes. At his kitchen table, Gerald opened his laptop and showed him financial records, meeting minutes, and emails. "Diane and the board have been using HOA funds like their personal bank account," he explained. "Special fees that disappear, contracts that go to family members, reserve funds that get invested in insider businesses." "Why show me this?" James asked. "Because I'm not the only unhappy homeowner," Gerald said. "Many of us are tired of her rules and her control. When you showed up with those property documents, it was the first time I've seen her scared." He pointed to a spreadsheet. "Look at these special assessments from last year. Every homeowner paid $2,000 for road repairs. The actual work cost half that amount. The rest vanished." "That's theft," James said. Gerald nodded. "And there's more. The 20 homes you said are on your land? The people who live there have been complaining about drainage problems for years. Diane keeps promising fixes, but nothing happens. Now we know why. She knew those houses might not legally belong to the HOA." As they talked, James's phone buzzed with texts from numbers he didn't recognize. "We support you against Diane. The Millers, 42 Sunny Pine Lane. She fined us $500 for planting vegetables instead of flowers. Can we help? Our children's playground equipment was removed without notice. We want to join your fight. The Rodriguezes." Gerald smiled slightly. "I may have shared your number with a few friends." For the first time since this battle began, James felt hope. Diane had power, connections, and money, but she had also made enemies. Many of them. "We need a plan," James said, "and I think I know where to start." As Gerald left, carefully driving past the security vehicles, James watched a light rain begin to fall on the half-built houses in the distance. Diane thought she was punishing him into submission. Instead, she had just helped him find the allies he needed to win this war. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow he would stop playing defense. His father always said, "The best trap isn't one your enemy walks into. It's one they help you build without knowing it." Diane had just handed him the final pieces he needed. James's water got shut off the next day. The electricity followed this morning. He stood in his kitchen, looking at spoiled food in the warm refrigerator. Diane Reynolds thought she could bully him off his own land by making life unbearable. She had another thing coming. James grabbed his notebook and headed out. If Diane wanted war, he needed allies. The first person he visited was Martha, who answered her door in a flowered house coat. "They shut off your utilities?" she gasped. "That's illegal." "So is building on my land," James replied, "but Diane has friends at the county office. I need to know who else might hate the HOA as much as we do." Martha's eyes lit up. "Oh, honey, grab a chair. This might take a while." She gave him 15 names: families who'd been fined for the wrong color mailbox, elderly couples threatened with liens for having grandchildren visit too often, a single mom who couldn't afford the $900 fee for putting up a small fence to keep her toddler safe. James spent the entire day knocking on doors throughout Sunny Pines. At first, people were scared to talk, but when he showed them his property documents, something changed. Hope replaced fear. Sarah Jenkins, whose garden had been forcibly removed, invited him in for lemonade. "Diane made my husband dig up our tomato plants because vegetables weren't aesthetically pleasing," she said, hands shaking with anger. "We got a $500 fine. My husband works 2 jobs already." The Patel family had spent $3,000 fighting the HOA over their porch swing. The Johnsons couldn't paint their front door the color they wanted. Every house looked exactly the same, beige with white trim. "It's not just the rules," Trevor Martinez explained while his wife Maria nodded. "It's how they enforce them." Diane drives around taking pictures of violations. Some people get warnings, others get instant fines. There's no fairness. By sunset, James had talked to 27 families, all with similar stories, all afraid of Diane Reynolds. He picked up his phone and called Walter. "Can we legally form a competing homeowners association?" he asked. "On your land?" "Absolutely," Walter replied. "But what about the existing homes?" "That's where it gets interesting," Walter said. "If those 20 homes are on your property as the original surveys suggest, they're not legally bound to Diane's HOA. The next day, James printed 200 flyers. "Emergency community meeting, your home may be at risk." He included copies of the original property survey. As darkness fell, the community center filled beyond capacity. 97 families showed up. People stood against walls when the chairs ran out. Diane arrived last, pushing through the crowd, her face twisted with rage. "This meeting is unauthorized. Everyone needs to leave immediately." Sarah Jenkins stood up. "Or what? More fines? Haven't you taken enough from us already?" The room erupted in applause. James walked to the front, holding up his hands for quiet. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," he began. "I came because my family's land was stolen. But after meeting all of you, I realized I'm not the only victim." For the next hour, residents shared stories of HOA abuse. Tears flowed. Voices shook with emotion. Diane sat stiffly in the back, tapping furiously on her phone. "Here's what I propose," James said when everyone had spoken. "We form the Meadow Creek Homeowners Coalition. Together, we negotiate new property lines that are fair to everyone. We create a new community agreement with reasonable rules and transparent finances." "You can't do that," Diane shouted. "These homes are bound by contract to Sunny Pines HOA." James held up the original land survey. "Contracts based on fraudulent property ownership aren't valid, Ms. Reynolds. But I'm not here to take anyone's home. I'm here to fix what's broken." The vote was nearly unanimous. 89 families joined the coalition on the spot. As people filed out, energized and hopeful, Gerald approached James privately. "There's something you should know," he whispered, glancing nervously at Diane across the room. "The HOA finances, they don't add up. Monthly dues keep increasing, but our reserves are shrinking. I've tried to look into it, but Diane controls all the accounts." James patted his shoulder. "Would you be willing to show me the books?" Gerald nodded. "Tomorrow morning. My office." Diane stormed over, pointing her finger in James's face. "You've made a terrible mistake. By this time tomorrow, you'll regret ever coming to Meadow Creek." "Is that a threat, Ms. Reynolds?" "It's a promise. I have the county commissioner, the police chief, and the local judge on speed dial. This little rebellion ends now." What she didn't know was that James had invited Janet Rivera, the reporter, to sit quietly in the back of the meeting. Every word had been recorded, every threat documented. As Diane slammed the door behind her, James's phone buzzed with a text from Walter. Environmental survey results came in. You won't believe what's on that land. James smiled. Diane thought she had all the power, but his father always said the truth was the most powerful weapon of all. And tomorrow, the truth about Sunny Pines HOA would be front-page news. Justice prevails. James woke up to police cars surrounding his farmhouse. Through the window, he spotted Diane Reynolds standing next to a tall man in uniform. "Time to face the music," the police chief announced as James opened the door. "You're trespassing on private property." James smiled calmly. "Actually, Chief Williams, I believe you'll find I'm the legal property owner." He handed him a folder containing the original land surveys and his father's deed. "These documents haven't been verified," Diane snapped. "They have actually." A woman stepped forward from a car James hadn't noticed. "Carolyn Mitchell, County Records Office. We pulled the original surveys last night after receiving some concerning reports." Diane's face went pale. "What reports?" James gestured toward the farmhouse. "Perhaps we should discuss this inside? Coffee's ready." 15 minutes later, his kitchen table held an unexpected gathering: the police chief, the county records clerk, Walter, and Diane, whose perfect makeup couldn't hide her growing panic. The original property lines were improperly recorded in 1973, Carolyn explained, spreading maps across the table. "This entire area, including the existing Sunny Pines homes and the new construction, legally belongs to the Thompson estate." The police chief whistled. "That's quite a mistake." "Not a mistake," Walter said quietly. "We have evidence suggesting the boundary change was deliberate." "Ridiculous." Diane slammed her hand on the table. "This is a scam to extort money from hardworking homeowners." "Speaking of money," James said, sliding a folder toward the police chief, "Gerald provided these financial records yesterday. 3 years of Sunny Pines HOA accounts." As the chief flipped through the pages, his expression darkened. "Ms. Reynolds, can you explain why $427,000 in homeowner dues was transferred to Sunshine Consulting LLC?" "That's our legitimate management company," she replied stiffly. "Registered to your son-in-law," James added, "along with 4 other companies that charge the HOA for services. Landscaping, security, maintenance, legal counsel, all going to businesses owned by your family members." The chief closed the folder. "Ms. Reynolds, we're going to need you to come down to the station." "This is absurd. Do you know who I am? My husband plays golf with Judge Harrington every Sunday." Diane protested as Chief Williams gently but firmly guided her toward the door. "I'm well aware of your connections, Ms. Reynolds," the chief replied calmly. "But even Judge Harrington can't ignore financial fraud and property theft of this magnitude." As the chief led a protesting Diane out, Carolyn turned to James. "What happens now?" "Those people's homes." "I have no intention of evicting anyone," James assured her. "But the development needs to stop until we can properly survey the wetlands." By afternoon, construction had halted. Local news vans lined the street outside the farmhouse. James's phone rang constantly with calls from worried homeowners. He called an emergency town hall meeting for that evening. The local high school auditorium was the only space large enough. Nearly 400 people packed the room: existing homeowners, construction workers now without jobs, county officials, and curious locals. Fear and anger filled the air. James took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. "My name is James Thompson. This was my father's land. I didn't come here looking for trouble. I came to honor his legacy." Shouts interrupted him. "What about our homes?" "Well, Sue, my life savings is tied up in that house." James raised his hands. "Please, I'm not here to take anything from you. In fact, I want to offer a solution that benefits everyone." The room quieted slightly. James continued, "First, all existing homeowners will receive proper legal deeds to their property. No one will lose their home." Murmurs of relief spread through the crowd. "Second, the new development will be redesigned to protect the wetlands that my father cherished. These aren't just swamps, they're critical habitats and natural flood protection for the entire area." James clicked to the next slide showing his father's environmental studies. These wetlands are home to 3 endangered species. Building on them isn't just wrong, it's illegal under federal law. A man stood up. I put my life savings into a lot in the new section. What happens to my investment? Fair question. We're establishing a property exchange program. Anyone who purchased in the protected area can swap for an equivalent lot in the redesigned development. No one loses their investment. For the next hour, James outlined his vision, a community that balanced homes with nature, transparent governance, reasonable rules, fair fees that actually went toward community improvements. Toward the end, Sarah Jenkins took the microphone. I've lived under Diane's rules for 8 years. I couldn't paint my door blue. I couldn't grow tomatoes. My kids couldn't play outside after 7 p.m. because it violated the noise ordinance. She looked around the room. Is that really the community we want? By the time the meeting ended, they had over 300 signatures supporting the new Meadow Creek Community Association. Even some of Diane's former allies joined, including Gerald, who agreed to help untangle the financial mess. A new beginning. The next 6 months weren't easy. Diane hired expensive lawyers who tried every trick to overturn James's claims, but the evidence was too strong. She eventually accepted a plea deal on the financial fraud charges to avoid jail time. Today, 1 year later, James sits on his father's porch, watching kids ride bikes past houses with doors painted every color of the rainbow. The community garden where Sarah's tomatoes grow tall is buzzing with neighbors sharing gardening tips. Behind him, his father's farmhouse has been transformed into the community center. Classes, meetings, and celebrations happen daily. The wetlands are protected by a conservation easement, with walking trails and educational signs explaining the importance of each plant and animal. Martha joins him on the porch, handing him lemonade. Your father would be bursting with pride, she says, pointing to where construction has finally resumed on the redesigned development. Smaller homes, more green space, solar panels on every roof. I found something while cleaning out his study, James tells her, pulling out a faded notebook, his father's journal from 30 years ago. He fought the original developers back then too, when they first tried to build on the wetlands. Martha smiles. He always said you were just like him. Stubborn as a mule when fighting for what's right. In the distance, a blue heron rises from the protected marsh, soaring above homes where people now live in harmony with the land. James watches the bird's graceful flight, reflecting on the journey that brought them here. It wasn't just about property lines or legal boundaries. It was about standing up for what's right, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. It was about a community finding its voice and working together to create something better than what they had before. The legacy. 2 weeks later, James stands before a gathering at the new community center, once his father's beloved farmhouse. The room is filled with faces both familiar and new, longtime residents of Meadow Creek, Sunny Pines homeowners, and even some of the construction workers who had once been tearing up his land. My father always believed that land wasn't something you owned so much as something you borrowed from future generations, James begins, his voice steady with conviction. He taught me that we have a responsibility to be good stewards, to protect what matters and to stand up when things aren't right. He gestures to the large windows overlooking the wetlands, where cattails sway in the gentle breeze and birds dart among the reeds. What we've accomplished here isn't just about saving some acres of land or establishing fair housing rules. It's about remembering what matters most: community, integrity, and the courage to fight for what's right. Sarah Jenkins steps forward, holding a plaque. On behalf of the Meadow Creek Community Association, we want to dedicate this center to your father, Robert Thompson, whose foresight and determination protected this land for all of us. As James accepts the plaque, his eyes mist over. The wooden sign reads, Thompson Community Center, where truth and justice prevail. My father would be honored, he says, but he would also remind us that this work is never finished. There will always be those who value profit over people, who see land as nothing more than a commodity to be exploited. Our job is to remain vigilant, to remember that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Gerald Fisher, now the treasurer of the new association, stands up. We've learned our lesson the hard way. When we bought our homes, we were so focused on property values and amenities that we didn't see what we were losing: our voice, our freedom, our sense of community. Thanks to you, James, we've found it again. After the ceremony, as people mingle and share stories, Rachel Winters, the young woman who had feared losing her life savings, approaches James. "I moved into my new home last week," she says. "It's smaller than what I originally bought, but it's better. The design respects the land, and my neighbors actually talk to each other." She smiles. "I planted a garden yesterday. Tomatoes just because I can." James nods, understanding the simple joy in her words. The freedom to plant what you want, to paint your door the color you choose, these are small things that make a home truly yours. Later that evening, as the sun sets over Meadow Creek, casting long shadows across the protected wetlands, James sits alone on his porch. In his hands, he holds his father's journal, open to an entry from decades ago. "Today I walked the eastern boundary of our land, where the wetlands meet the rising ground. A developer came by again, offering what he called good money for acreage that's just sitting there doing nothing. I tried to explain that the land is doing exactly what it should, filtering water, providing habitat, keeping floods at bay." He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Perhaps I am. In a world that values only what can be bought and sold, caring for something because it's right seems strange indeed. But I will keep fighting. Someday, James will understand why this matters. James closes the journal, his heart full. "I understand now, Dad," he whispers to the evening air. "I understand." The story of Meadow Creek reminds us that the true value of a community isn't measured in property values or amenities, but in the courage of its citizens to stand up for what's right. In a world where development often comes at the cost of our natural heritage, and where profit sometimes overshadows people, we must remember that each of us has the power to make a difference. Like James Thompson, we may find ourselves facing challenges that seem insurmountable. Whether it's protecting our environment, preserving our communities, or simply ensuring that truth and justice prevail, the path forward begins with a single step: the decision to stand firm for what we believe in. Today, take a moment to look around your own community. Are there natural spaces worth protecting? Are there neighbors who need support? Are there injustices that need addressing? Your voice matters. Your actions count. And like the ripples from a stone cast into still water, your courage can inspire others to join you. Share this story with someone who needs encouragement to stand up for what's right. Remember that the most valuable legacy we can leave isn't measured in acres or dollars, but in the positive difference we make in the lives of others and in the world around us. In the words of Robert Thompson, some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. What will you fight for today?